Yeah, okay. All right, hello everyone, and welcome to my talk today, where we'll be looking at some Monty Python references and look at some engineering metrics to help you be more higher performing teams. Anyway, software is hard. I think we can all agree on that, and every year, every day is basically becoming harder and harder to ship better and better software, because our requirements are constantly increasing, the challenges are constantly increasing, the amount of technology we rely on is constantly increasing, and what's great today is going to be barely passable tomorrow, and the day later or year later is going to be inadequate, basically. So it's a rapid change in the industry, but luckily there are some tools out there to help us with that. I'm sure you know this one, the CNCF landscape. But also, unfortunately, there are so many tools out there to help you achieve and build great software. And it's increasingly more and more important to kind of figure out what works well for you and use it well so that you can keep delivering great software. My name is Zan, and I'm a developer advocate at CircleCI. I'm based in London, and yeah, it's great to be home for a conference for a change, I suppose. If you've not heard of CircleCI before, what we are is we're a CI/CD platform. In fact, we're the largest company that's dedicated to CI/CD. We support companies from Fortune 500 to tiny startups to giant open source projects in pretty much every single industry out there, and every field you can imagine. Building for obviously cloud native tooling to embedded to web to mobile and everything and anything in between. So yeah, that's what we are, and let's crack on. Let's go back to the tech industry. So our industry is changing, and it's changing fast. So if you imagine had a time machine 4 years ago, how the world looked like. And then 3 years ago, in 2020, we wouldn't have been here, right? We would have been doing this over Hopin or something. And 2021, tech was like absolutely booming, like there was no tomorrow. And then last year, tech started contracting, and there came new and new challenges. We suddenly had to do more or equal amount of work with fewer people, smaller teams, projects were being cancelled and canned. So it seems like the only constant that we are dealing with is obviously the change. And that's just going to accelerate, to be honest. And at the same time, your teams are basically, the objective is to kind of keep building the best possible experience for the users, the best possible tooling for your organization to kind of achieve the business outcomes. Again, with fewer and fewer resources, fewer and fewer people, you have to achieve more and more. So you could say that you seek the Holy Grail, and hence all the references here. And the way we do it is by mastering our tooling. Because I work for a CI/CD company, I'm going to be talking about this from a CI/CD perspective. And just to put it into perspective, like if the difference between using a CI/CD tool and using it really well can be significant, right? There is definitely big impact to be made if you are using it to enable your teams to be more and more productive. At the same time, what we've seen, especially in larger organization, is over the last couple of years, is this growth and emergence of the platform team as the custodians and the masters of kind of great internal developer experience, developer tooling, who are basically helping us get the most out of our tooling. And I'll talk about platform teams a bit later at the end of the talk, but it's just happening. Anyway, every year there are some reports being published. The most famous one is probably DORA report, where basically anyone gets a chance to fill in a questionnaire, a very long questionnaire, about your DevOps practices, deployment practices, how often you deploy, what team size, all of these things. And you basically get to score yourself, and then they create these reports. And they're great, and they're fantastic a source of insight. On the other hand, we as a pretty big CI/CD platform, we have access to raw data as compared to more like qualitative type of research that DORA represents. So raw data meaning we know how many pipelines are being run, we know how long they take to run, and what people are building, etc. So that's what we're doing with our state of software delivery reports. We started back in 2019 with the first one, and then 2021, 2022, and now this year's report as well. And I'll be talking about some of those metrics that are found in these reports. What we also do is we create a set of benchmarks that you can compare your teams against, and to see like how you're faring compared to other folks in your region, other folks in the world, from the elite teams to median performance, etc. And they are merely, basically they're merely as suggestions, because like every team is different, every org is different, so you can't just say you should be aiming for this number and that's it. No, you have to figure out something that works for you in particular. So yeah, what are those benchmarks that we're talking about? So we identified 4. So duration, mean time to recovery, success rate, and throughput. And I'll be talking through all of them. So how do you achieve elite status through a holistic software delivery experience? We'll find out, or we're gonna see some Monty Python references. You can be here for both. Anyway, first one, duration. Probably the most obvious one and the most common to compare for anyone, and the one that directly impacts the most people, the most developers. So how quickly can you do your pipelines get code from commit to finish, basically, whether that's running tests or whether that's running the whole kind of deployment, provisioning pipeline, it doesn't really matter. We are kind of looking at duration across pretty much all of the pipelines. And the data set that we're talking about, just to put it in perspective, we looked at about 15 million workflows from, I think, actually about September last year in the last one, basically. So quite a lot of data. And we kind of compared the results of them. So yeah, so how quickly does a unit of work, so unit of change, if you will, move through the pipeline? This obviously impacts you in multiple ways. One is you spend less time waiting on a build, which means you get feedback faster, you get code to production faster, if you will, and it all kind of boils down to how optimized your pipelines really are. And the more optimized your pipelines, obviously, the happier developers are, because they're not spending a lot of time just waiting on builds. They're kind of they're spending their time productive, being in the flow state, etc. So yeah, but obviously speed and duration by itself is not the ultimate goal. Sure, you have to be super fast, you have to be as fast as possible, but you also have to think about that whenever you're optimizing for duration only, you are probably doing that at the expense of validation. So you're running less tests, you're running maybe fewer security scans, maybe you're not testing enough, basically. So it's always a trade-off. I like to compare it to an ambulance, right? An ambulance has, the objective is to get from A to B really fast, right? Because obviously you want to get the person who's injured to the hospital as fast as possible, but also that person needs to come to the hospital as intact as possible as well. So I hope this makes sense. You couldn't do it in a race car, basically. So the benchmark that we identified is about 10 minutes or less than 10 minutes. So less than that, your developers are not spending a ton of time waiting on builds. They can maybe just go for a coffee, come back, build is complete, they can move on to the next task. More than that, you're kind of breaking the flow states, so it's really kind of important to aim for that kind of duration. And the data is basically showing that a significant number of pipelines and workflows, they do complete in a lot less time than that. But this is just because there are so many workflows out there that are just super tiny, right? There might be 2 unit tests that run, or like a Hello World apps, etc., that can also be counted in here. And obviously some software is more complex than others to build and test. So yeah, what we've seen actually in this benchmark is that from the previous year to this year, the duration, the medians have actually gone down by about half a minute, which is really cool. So they were about 4 minutes before, and now they're about 3.3 minutes, or just under 4 minutes. So that's really good. And yeah, the top 75th percentile is under 9 minutes. Obviously, the more you increase, there's longer pipelines that are kind of bringing the averages up, and our average is about 11 minutes for our data set anyway. But yeah, this 5 to 10 minute benchmark should give you an idea of what's a good spot to be in, basically. And how do we do that? If you're running low on duration, should you be increasing work just because to increase the duration? Of course not, but you have to think about what's tested. Am I covering all the critical paths for my software, for that particular piece of software anyway? So do we need to increase more tests? Do we need to add more end-to-end testing, maybe some security scanning, etc.? And just kind of use that as a nice benchmark. And that's going to give you this nice idea of how to get things faster or at a good duration. Again, if you're running too long pipelines, if your pipelines are running for too long, you may want to think about reducing that, and that can be done by increasing parallelism, splitting off the longest running tests into like an asynchronous piece of work, for example, like a nightly build, etc. There are things you could do to make sure that your kind of the most regular pipelines and workflows are around 10-minute mark, basically. So the second and probably most interesting one to me is mean time to recovery. So what this means is, how long does it take us to get from a failed build to a successfully passing build, so back to green? Because if you think about it, if you have a failed build, especially on the default branch, be it main or master or trunk, whatever you call it, doesn't really matter. It means that if you're relying on that pipeline for production deployments, you can't do it while it's red. And it's important to kind of get it back to green as fast as possible, so that you can ship fixes, ship updates to your users as fast as possible. Martin Fowler actually put it really well, that it's super important that it needs to be fixed right away. Again comes the ambulance analogy, where if you see the lights are flashing red and blue, right, you let that thing pass, right? You know there's an emergency going on. So the same thing with CI/CD pipelines. If your main branch is broken, try to get it fixed as fast as possible, because you want to be working off this kind of stable and functioning base. And the benchmark we identified for mean time to resolve is about 60 minutes or less than 60 minutes for the default branch. There might be more for if you're working on a feature branch, on a development branch, or an experimentation branch. It's fine if it goes longer than that, because it's not urgent. But your branch that does the deployment to production, that one needs to be fixed as soon as possible. The data is basically showing that about half of the pipelines are fixed almost within that time. And the fastest workflows actually resolve in less than 5 minutes. It could be that they are so much smaller that they're easier to fix, or it could be that they are worked on by the most highest performing teams. But yeah, but what's important and interesting with this mean time to recovery is that this has actually gone down by a whole minute. Actually, no, sorry, a whole 10 minutes. The median has gone down by 10 minutes over the last year, basically. So it went from 70-something minutes down to less than 64 minutes. So that's a really important improvement on the industry scale that we've seen, basically. And the tip I have here is basically to look at your default branch and, as I said, like, treat it as the lifeblood of your project. It's the most important thing that cannot fail. If you break it, you can't deploy. If you break it, you can't ship bug fixes. So it's the most important thing that's crucial to kind of be on top of. And how do we get that? Like, first off, think about how you're going to log things, right? How you're logging your test results, how you're logging your error messages. Make sure that whatever information you're kind of putting out for whoever is going to be debugging this, because it might not be you if you're developing it today, that it's as easy to understand where the issue was as possible. You might also want to set up some kind of notifications, like either email or some kind of paging tool, Slack. If something is red, especially the main branch of a project, everyone who's touching the project needs to know that this is now the priority to get it back. And just understanding the tools, right? So we have this SSH debugging feature. You have a running build. You don't know why it's broken, but you can still kind of SSH to it and figure out, oh, these tests are breaking, or there is something missing in the script that we've written that's now broken. Makes it super easy to debug. There are things like flaky test detection that obviously help you say, oh, 2 tests out of 2,000 have failed. Why is that? Because they are flaking out. So maybe let's focus on getting those 2 tests resolving as quickly as possible. Success rate, our third metric is essentially just a percentage of runs that are passing versus all of the runs. Especially important on the main or default branches that you have. They give you a signal, right? So even if it's red, it's fine if it's red a percentage of time, but not too high percentage of time, basically. So, because it's telling you, hey, my pipeline, my tests are doing their job. They told me that my changes aren't passing the validations that I have in place, which is great. And the benchmark that we kind of identified for this is about 90%. Again, depends on what kind of project you have, depends on the nature of the organization, whether it's a default branch or non-default branch. But yeah, if you aim for like 90% for the most crucial branches that you have, this is going to be a good one, especially compared with the mean time to resolve for 60 minutes or less. So we're actually seeing that we're nowhere near the benchmark as the industry. About 77% on the default branch, but also that non-default branches are much less, have a much lower success rate, which means that people are experimenting more on non-default branches. And so make sure that you're kind of putting that into account. This hasn't changed much from year to year, but compared with MTTR, which has dropped significantly, this still shows some good improvement on the industry level. And the last metric I have in benchmark is throughput. So how many workflows am I running as an organization on a given project in a 24-hour period, basically. So again, This is like a meta metric, kind of based on success rates, on durations, mean time to resolve, all of these things. So it's just like a useful idea of how your teams are working, and it's going to depend on so many things. For example, it's going to depend on your nature of the project, right? If it's like a actively developed microservice, it's going to have a much higher throughput than something that you're just maintaining, some piece of legacy software that you're just kind of bug fixing every couple of weeks, basically. So it really, it's important to know that this depends on so many factors, especially your organization. And that's also our kind of recommended benchmark. Figure out what works for you, your team, and do it and set it accordingly, basically. And you can see that, yeah, like top performance, they ship to, well, they run the default pipelines about 7 times per day, which is really good. But the medium is much, much lower than that. And this has also not improved much, or not moved much. It has improved slightly, but yeah, just a little. But yeah, again, because MTTR has gone down, this is still kind of good to see static. But it's also important to notice, yeah, it depends on so many other metrics. And what I recommend here is basically to use it as a baseline, see what you have right now, and just monitor for any deviations, basically. If you see any deviations off that, make sure that you know why you have changed this throughput level. Putting everything together, so comparing from previous years, like you can see that duration is steadily decreasing, time to resolve is steadily decreasing, and yeah, the rest are about the same. So hopefully that time to resolve is going to be less than 60 minutes in the future. We also released this EMEA version, so Europe focused version of the report, which kind of shows you how different European markets compare. As a whole, Europe has a much higher time to recovery, which is quite interesting, but it just means that we're taking a lot longer. But like even within here, there are significant differences between markets. Like just look at UK and Germany, for example. But for example, Germany has a much more better success rate on the default branch than the rest of Europe or UK, basically. So yeah, as I said, I want to say a few things about platform teams as well. So as I said, there's a lot of tools out there. There's a lot of tools that we need to keep into account when we're building our software, especially in the cloud native space. And for an average development team, app development team that's touching the kind of user-facing products, that's just too much. You're just not going to see any much productivity. So that's why organizations started setting up these platform teams, essentially, to be like a center of excellence for their orgs, basically, and so that the development team can focus on shipping, essentially, using what they have. So platform teams, they basically need to look into standardizing things like test suites, CI configs, making sure that, yeah, things like that are in place. So I think I'm out of time. So the slides are all uploaded. So I have a link to them at the end. So I'm not going to go too much in here. State of Software Delivery Report. You can Google that. And welcome you to read it. And we're also running a little raffle for a Baby Yoda Lego set. If you want some Circle CI swag or slides, just scan this one and I'll sort you out. And that's it for me.